I cried.
Oh, God.
Right? I knew that everything I'd built up over the last 15 years of doing this job was going to be finished. We are, whether you like it or not, we are a foreign-owned production line in this country where we are owned by outside interests and we put things together. We are not like Germany where we own BMW, you know, where we own Audi, we own VW. We got BMW Mini in Oxford, Sunderland, Swindon, Honda. You know, they're all foreign-owned, and they're all here because they've got access to the single market, and they've got the freedom of movement of goods where you do not need transit documents and you do not need carnets. And I'll give you another example.
Yeah, please do.
Exhibitions, goods and services going to exhibitions. If you go to Norway or Switzerland and you've got 100 grand's worth of exhibition stuff in the back of your van, you've got to pay 25% up front before it even goes into the country. Right?
Yeah.
That would put people out of business overnight.
Of course it will.
We've had to do it.
Why? This isn't your field of expertise. It's ostensibly mine. But does it baffle you that the coverage is so low and so confused? Because it's clear to you what's going on. You hear politicians, and obviously some of them on this radio station, saying stuff about the customs union that's palpably absurd. They're going unchallenged, not really because of bias, but because of ignorance. This is your field of knowledge. This is literally your specialist subject.
I'll tell you what I've been doing, James.
Go on.
I've been calling out the liars on Twitter.
Yeah.
Hurry, goes out to Switzerland for an hour, stands at a border and says it's frictionless.
Yeah.
You'll believe it. I put 1 million pictures on there. I put a picture of a transit document, a carnet, and a CMR form. I said, list me what those forms do, how you fill them out, and what they cost. Didn't get a reply.
Who was that?
That was Kate Hurry.
Yeah.
Standing at a border crossing. She went into
I think Daniel Hannan's taken a picture of himself somewhere as well and said it's all really easy.
I called him out as well. I called him out and called him a liar. I've got actual pictures on my phone of going through the Swiss border in Basel and coming out at Lake Como. And I'll tell you now, it's far from frictionless. When you go in, I'll tell you what, the Swiss border closes at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening and reopens at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. You can't enter with commercial goods.
Yeah, for people, I don't want people to get confused. It's in Schengen, so if you're on your holidays, you can cross over to Heart's Content. But if you're
yes, you can. As long as you get your vignette, you can cross. But you still have to drive down the motorway that will end and drive underneath a big customs plaza with the police standing there.
Greetings, mortal.
Unless your goods are running on what is called a carnet.
Order.
Right, which is a passport for your goods if they go from multiple place to place. They cost £650 to compile. I've done one. I've done one to Norway. 650 quid. I had to go and pick it up from the Department of Trade in London. And it took them a week to put together, and my customer said they're never going to Norway to do an exhibition again.
I don't know if I should do this, but I'm late for the news. You've blown the story wide open. Anyone who's doubting it, first of all saying it's all my fault for making these predictions, and then I point out it's actually the government. You do. Here's one genius saying, oh yeah, you've got your mate to phone in, nice one. This desperation people have to believe that the unicorns are coming. It's quite incredible because this is, you run a haulage company. You're not some Remainer academic or some metropolitan. You're a blinking van driver who's built up a business, and now you're about to see it go down the toilet because of Brexit.
Well, I am, and I'll tell you what, I need another van because my work's actually expanded, but I'm scared to buy one.
Because?
Steve, I'll be left with a van that I've got to pay finance on, and they're not cheap. Contract. So what do I do?
I was in the US and Canada with the International Trade Committee the week before last.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I examined Greg Hans as the trade minister in our committee yesterday. And one of the things that I was pointing out was that some of the numerical assumptions that people have been making about effectively they've been saying how little benefit there will be to the UK economy of potentially doing trade deals around the rest of the world just don't really stack up when you look at the numbers behind them.
But they have to be better than what we currently got, don't they?
Well, look, it's...
No, I won't look. They just do, because in order to persuade people to do something, you have to persuade them that they'll end up in a better place than where they started. And you don't need me to remind you that Donald Trump's just announced a trade war.
More war.
Well, my position is always
We have
been
much
that
to discuss.
net things in the medium term would be effectively around the same as where they are now. You know,
What about in the short term?
Some things will be a bit less than they were before, and other things will be more.
Would it be unfair of me to ask? Hang on a minute. Can you refer me in any way to pre-referendum pronouncements when you said things will be worse than they were before in some areas?
So when I
It
made
is a
a speech in
particularly
before
beautiful
the vote, I was very careful to set out the net effects. There were some positives and some negatives.
But these would be economic impact assessments, wouldn't they? So where are things going to be worse?
Actually, economics. A lot of it wasn't
Well,
economic.
we're talking. Listen, I don't want this to get fractious because I am short of time. But I'm looking for reasons to be cheerful, and saying that we can do more trade with a country that's just announced a trade war is. I mean, it's low on my dial of cheerfulness.
So, for example, the Aussies, when they did their free trade agreement with the US, they vastly underestimated what that would be worth to them. They've actually seen their trade increase by 50%.
But you lead me again to the question of how that is going to be better than what we've currently got. I mean, we can talk over each other until the cows come home, but
It'll make up for any extra costs of what we do with the EU.
you do know that Australia is on the other side of the world, and the
Might I go
European
with you
Union has
next
a land
time?
border with the United Kingdom.
It's also a long way from
Stick
the US.
with me.
Yes,
You know
it is, but
heroin,
we're not the US,
but I know
and the
Reverend
US was never in the largest single market in the world, and we're leaving it, you say, to benefit from being able to trade with Australia while diminishing our ability to trade with Germany.
So just to give an example, the 0.2%, which the Treasury has said is what the potential value of deal with the US, doing a
It has
deal
been
with the US
eons.
might be,
I thought you
is
were
about
all lost.
5 billion.
Come quickly.
And
The
in
way
the
is open
context
to
of the
all of
European
us.
Union?
Well, in
Your own government
exist
impact
in
assessment. Your own
perfect
government
communion with
impact.
destiny under you.
market,
I'm
in the
exactly
US,
your amusement.
right over $1 trillion
Also,
of business
it
every
is
year.
just
That's
Rana
just one
now.
sector.
That's because they don't have a health service.
Just Rana?
Huge,
I will
huge
await your
What has
return.
That's
happened
because
to...
they don't have a health service.
Wait,
health
the
is
more
actually a
Walker
pretty small
approaches.
proportion of that. There's a lot more in the property.
okay.
casualty and
I'm
life.
grateful for the call. If I was to annotate what you've told me, and I am insisting that you obey the same rules as everybody else who rings the programme, reasons to be cheerful, you've given me Australia's trade deal with America being a bit better than they expected, or even a lot better than they expected. I don't want to put that words in your mouth. That's what you've got, Marcus Fish, MP for Yeovil.
One example. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Have a great day. What do you do now? Elected members of Parliament, look, we're walking away. Both sides now concede. His own Prime Minister concedes. It's going to do us economic damage. Where are the pluses? Well, America signed a trade deal with Australia, and it's gone a bit better than some people predicted.
I recently went self-employed a couple of years ago, so it was a big thing voting Brexit because I was building my business with client base, etc. But I think it's all going to be short-term.
What business are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm a self-employed electrician, although we're getting bigger and bigger as the weeks go by. But you know,
What's going to be short-term, Ashley?
personal loss, personal financial loss.
Oh. But they did, to be fair, before the vote, they did tell you there wouldn't be any.
Well, I think I was.
Are things happening here that I have never seen before? There are things happening in the United Kingdom that I've never seen before. It is as if an oil tanker is turning around, and it's not going to happen quickly. I'm pretty confident you can't turn an oil tanker around quickly. It is as if the realization of what people like me have been screaming about for a few years now has reached a crystallization, a distillation, if you like, a concentration in the case of Truss and Kwarteng, that means even people who think that I took leave of my senses in 2016 are now having to go, oh yeah, do you know what, that Tufton Street business probably is And actually the failure of the media to actually report, react, yeah, that probably, and actually the markets and the rest of the world are looking at us and responding in a way that bears no resemblance whatsoever to the way in which we've been told things are being done and we've been told things are being run. The Daily Mail had a front page, finally, a true conservative budget. When was that, 3 weeks ago? Finally a true conservative budget. They don't understand anything either. They're all high on their own supply, and that supply...
Blessings to you.
remove immigration from the mix. They've got nothing left, these people. They pretend to be cross about environmental protesters or
I greet you in
universities
kind.
teaching more history than they used. They're not really cross about that. They might feel threatened and frightened by it, but it's not a visceral hatred like they feel for refugees or foreigners. You remove the refugees and the foreigners from the landscape of British political discourse, and the people who've been in the steering seat, the people who've been in the driving seat for the last 6 years, have got absolutely nothing to say. It's a part of the reason why everything's falling apart. But the speed with which it's falling apart is quicker than the response of the people responsible for it. Whether they're politicians, because the Conservative Party isn't making the noises it should be making when you've got a sort of kamikaze pilot in the front of the bus, and the media doesn't know what to do. They've been so long tugging their forelocks and doffing their caps at whoever was anointed by the Tory faithful. They've got no idea how to respond to the fact that you've got a complete wazard. Two complete wazards surrounded by sycophants and idiots in charge of the entire country. And that's why the markets are spooked, because they heard that mini budget.
More
sort of went,
Walker. We have much to discuss.
Get out! These people haven't got the first idea what they're doing. But it's almost patriotically difficult to admit that, because we live here and we love living here and we love our country, and to see the people in charge embark upon such a boneheaded evil path is hard to fully appreciate, because you don't want to believe it. You want to believe it. Oh, it can't be that bad. Oh, it can't be. They're all the same. But they're not. These two are uniquely awful. Uniquely awful. And to see that in a country where Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister and Nadine Dorries has been a Secretary of State within the last few months, to talk of trust and quality has been uniquely awful, should give everyone a shiver. Absolutely everyone. I'm going to ask you what you think is going to happen next. You don't need any qualifications to answer this question.
There
All
is
I ask
much
is
to be done.
Consideration and contemplation. Just take a couple of minutes to think it through before you ring in. It could be a comforting contribution, it could be a terrifying one, it could be somewhere in between. What is going to happen next? And you can come at it from either the political, the fiscal, or the economic, the social or the personal, or possibly even the professional. What is going to happen?
Our
We are in
fates
uncharted waters.
converge.
The people we normally rely upon to tell us how uncharted the waters are can't do so, because they were part of the process of putting us into these waters. The BBC is doing its best. Its live blog is its lead story on its website. I don't know what sort of numbers it gets, but the Daily Mail is leading on a demand for a bank holiday when the King gets crowned in May of 2023. So what do you think is going to happen next? And I've done this a few times recently with a degree of success. I would really like to talk to Conservative members in the first instance and Conservative voters in the second. And the more dyed in the wool you are as a Conservative voter, the more interesting your contribution becomes. You may not recognise my analysis, you may dispute it, you may dismiss it, you may reject it. I don't currently see how you can, but it doesn't affect your qualifications to answer this question. What is going to happen next?
Hide from your foes,
Do you
but
want to have a
never
little
the
listen
truth.
to who is the new enemies of the people? You remember the old editor of the Daily Mail put High Court judges on the list, so we can put High Court judges. That's not really lefty lawyers they've had a crack at as well. None of them are as big as the big three, are they? Immigrants, the EU, and the unemployed. If you can't have one of them in the firing line, what on earth are you going to do as a Conservative Prime Minister to fire up the base? Have a listen.
I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back.
Don't know what that is yet, but I'm going to clap anyway, because, you know, it's conference.
Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP. The militant unions, the vested interests dressed up as think tanks.
Hey?
The talking heads, the Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier.
Talking heads, Brexit deniers. What's a Brexit denier?
The fact is,
Hang on, back to it. What was the last one? Exile. Labour.
they prefer protesting to doing.
Who do?
They prefer talking on Twitter to
Hail,
taking tough
champion.
decisions.
I've seen this
They
speech on Twitter.
taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio
All I do,
to
I do
dismiss
for
anyone
Gilnates.
challenging the status quo.
Who is she talking about there specifically? North London townhouses, down with that sort of thing, to BBC studios.
From broadcast to podcast,
Hello?
they peddle the same old answers.
Hey?
It's always more
Clap, clap.
taxes,
May I tempt you
more
with my
regulation,
wares?
and more meddling.
Has anyone ever come across a podcast calling for more taxes?
You struck a hard bargain.
Have you ever come
Good
across
show.
a podcast calling for more taxes?
For you,
There we go. Should we
I
try that again?
offer
Phone up
only
driving,
the
by way. Is this
finest.
going to work, is the question. I genuinely don't know. I hope not, obviously, but I hope that all the previous ones wouldn't work.
Until
I
our
hope that all the
next
lies about
all
Airbnb
goods
wouldn't
and
work,
services
but they
for
did, and we
sale.
left it. I hope that all the lies about immigrants wouldn't work, but they did, and they left. I hope that all the lies about unemployed people wouldn't work, but they did. And our welfare state got absolutely kebabbed under so-called austerity. So 0345 60973
Remember,
is the question, is the number you need to
everything has
ask the question
value.
of whether or not this is going to work. Let's just run through it
Everything
again, 'cause
is negotiable.
I got a bit lost. Did she mention Hugh Grant? Oh no, High Court. Sorry, I can't read my own writing. High Court judges. I don't think they got a mention. So here it is. Here is the new. Here are the new. Get your tenses right, O'Brien.
For
Here are the
you,
new
I offer
enemies
only the
of
finest.
the people.
All goods and
I will
services
not
for
allow
sale.
The anti-growth coalition
Ooh.
to hold us back.
Okay, right, Reverend, pay attention now. Let's get all this written down. Who's in it, Liz? Who's in the anti-growth coalition?
May I tempt you with my wares?
In your own time.
Labour,
Okay,
the
what-
Lib Dems, the SNP.
That's everyone else.
The
isn't it?
militant unions.
Militant
The
union.
vested interests dressed up as think tanks.
But Downing Street's full of
Talking
people
heads,
from
the
think tanks.
Brexit
Talking
deniers,
heads.
Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier.
Brexit deniers. And two very pleasant-looking ladies who held up a banner about fracking. Down with that sort of thing. Okay, what's the fact?
They prefer protesting to doing. They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo.
12 years in power, you are the status quo, aren't you? Aren't you, though? No?
It would be my pleasure to help you.
They peddle the same old answers. It's always
Just never
more
listen to
taxes,
Mythic,
more regulation, and more meddling.
More taxes, more regulation.
Always a pleasure.
Wrong.
Tell me what you need, my friend.
Wrong, wrong, wrong. Is it going to work?
This realm
0345
offers
606
infinite
0973.
opportunities.
Who does she like? So we've got Labour, Liberal Democrats and the SNP. She sat in a cabinet, of course, that was in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and indeed she used to be in it, didn't she? She used to be in the Liberal Democrats back when she was calling for the monarchy to be abolished. So all politicians except, well, you can't say except the Conservatives, because quite a lot of the Conservatives have turned on her as well and are objecting to quite a lot of her policies. So just most politicians, almost all other politicians, almost all politicians, it's probably quite a popular line, that, until you remember that she is one herself. Militant unions, well, that
How
means
may
unions
I
that have some
serve?
sort of agency, does it? The militant, how can you tell whether a union is militant or not? Answer, well, can it take meaningful action to protect its
Everything
members'
is
rights? Yes, it can. It's
negotiable.
militant then. Talking heads. I mean, I take that a bit personally, actually. I've got to be honest with you. Do you think she's talking about me, Keith? No? Doesn't know who I am, he said. Talking heads, podcasts and broadcasts. Come on, I don't live in North London, but I mean, I've got a house. Is it a townhouse? I don't know. What's a townhouse? North London townhouses. Why is that a pejorative? What is it about North London that is supposed to upset the audience at Conservative Party conference in Birmingham? Is she going to boycott the BBC now? I didn't understand that. Or is she just not
It
going to
is
get
clear.
involved?
You
Or if she goes
deserve
there, she's
only
got a
the
pogo
best.
stick or something. Broadcast and podcast. More taxes. Where are these podcasts calling for more taxes, more meddling, and more regulation? I haven't heard any. I haven't heard any of them. I'm listening to a very good podcast at the moment, Gabriel Gatehouse, looking into the origins of the January the 6th coup attempt in America and the whole QAnon thing. I'm pretty sure he hasn't called for any higher taxes. Have you been listening to the new podcast News Agents with Emily and John and Lewis? It's very, very good, but I haven't heard it calling for more meddling. Where are these podcasts that are calling for more meddling?
The Arbiter sees all truths.
Greetings, the two protesters in Birmingham were almost in twin satin pearls, dressed very much for the role. Like geniuses, they had two banners. So some bozo comes along and rips the first banner out of their hand, and cool as you like, they just took another banner out. Very calm, very measured. They were just reminding Liz Truss that in 2019 she campaigned on a manifesto that pledged there wouldn't be any fracking anywhere in this country without local approval. And they seem to be reverse ferreting from that position. So put on the list people who remind Tories of their own manifesto. Manifesto reminders, down with that sort of thing. What's a Brexit denier, do you think? Someone who says that Brexit hasn't happened yet? They're not generally in the category of people that the rest of this list
You have my
they're people who say that Brexit
undivided
hasn't happened yet.
attention.
There hasn't been a real Brexit. My unicorn hasn't arrived. For example, I don't know. What would a Brexit denier? What is a Brexit denier? There has been
I
no
live to
Brexit.
serve.
I don't
More
understand.
Walker.
But anyway, down with them. Twitter. I told you why they hate Twitter. They hate Twitter because they can't control it. I think it really is that simple. And because relatively articulate people who are not sponsored by press barons can achieve quite high followings, quite large followings. You'd be amazed what some of Flotsam and Jetsam have got up to 1 million followers in recently. Broadcasting podcasts, so down with words, is it? Words? People who speak? Talking heads? People who
The
speak?
purpose reveals our way.
Downing Street is full of people from think tanks. The ones that I think she likes are the ones that are secretly funded, right? So down with think tanks who have transparent funding. We don't want any of that sort of thing. So, right, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, unions, people who talk, Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, people who remind Conservatives about the contents of the last Conservative manifesto, people on Twitter, but not obviously the people on Twitter who are Conservatives, like Liz Truss, people who appear on the BBC, but obviously not including Liz Truss and other Conservative politicians, people with broadcasting about more taxes, more regulation and more meddling. So she just must have a problem with podcasts in general. It's probably because she's the only person in the country that hasn't got one. Even Steve Cohen's got one. It'll clear the air. Well worth a listen. And that's all. Is that
All
everything?
goods and
Is it?
services for sale.
So here's the plan. I will persuade the British people that most of the politicians, the unions, everyone on the telly, Brexit deniers, environmental campaigners, people who remind Conservatives of the contents of their last manifesto, people with too many followers on Twitter, people who appear on the BBC, people with podcasts or jobs in broadcasting. She didn't mention newspaper journalists. I wonder why that would be. And people who want higher taxes, higher regulation and higher meddling. No, I don't think anyone's ever campaigned on a more meddling. I don't think it would work. What do we want? More meddling. When do we want it now? I can't quite see that kicking off. All of those things are supposed to enrage your Daily Mail reading dad. Okay?
Remember,
Do you think it's going to
everything.
work?
You are welcome here. All soon.
3 minutes after 12, before we get stuck into the next conversation, just another bit of context. So a chap called Paul Donovan is the chief economist at UBS Global Wealth Management. So, I mean, you know, these are the people that really have to know what they're talking about. And he sends
You
out a
honor me
comment,
with your attention.
I think every day or every Monday. And this is what he had to say today. The global signals from the UK's mini-budget matter. Modern monetary theory has been taken into a corner by the bond markets and beaten up. Advanced economy bond yields are not supposed to be the way UK gilt yields rose. This also reminds investors that modern politics produces
The
parties that are
arbiter
more extreme
sees all
than either the voter or
truths.
the investor consensus. Investors seem inclined to regard the UK Conservative Party as a doomsday cult. I don't think that
Tell me what you need,
use language
my
like
friend.
this ordinarily. A doomsday cult. That's the sort of thing I've been saying for years about this lot. And now you have the chief economist of UBS Global Wealth Management saying exactly the same thing. That's what I talked about earlier when I was talking about fairies. They honestly just believe that they can somehow believe reality different. They can believe things that don't exist into existence. They can believe things that do exist out of existence. They can believe things better. And where did all that begin? Where did we first see politicians of whom we thought we knew better? Suggesting that you can actually believe your way into a different reality, an alternative reality. Yeah, you got it. It was Brexit. And it is to Brexit now that we return. Because there is a remarkable story unfolding. It was on the front page of the Sunday Times yesterday, suggesting that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, in their pursuit of growth, will need to see more. I can't believe we're doing this already. Do you remember when we talked about liberty of motion?
I
Liberty of
remember
motion?
you.
I said to you that eventually, in order to replace the holes left in our workforce by freedom of movement, they will have to bring back freedom of movement, but give it another name. And that name I suggested would be liberty of motion.
What?
I also suggested to you not long ago that eventually so many sectors would have been given a special dispensation to attract foreign workers that we would have liberty of motion in all but name. And of course the big difference between freedom of movement and liberty of motion is that liberty of motion doesn't apply to you or your children. They will not have freedom to move. And in
is
fact,
both
the
a
people that
burden.
we will almost be begging to come here are probably going to be offered a form of second-class citizenship anyway, because otherwise they're going to have all sorts of problems with their base.
How
So
did the jailer
Liz
find
Truss
us?
and Kwasi Kwarteng believe that they need to make changes to the shortage occupations list to recruit more overseas staff. They're also contemplating a loosening of the English language requirement in some sectors. You remember the racist element of Brexit? I just stress again, because I think it is important, even if people persist in misrepresenting you. I think it is important to be clear about this. Not everybody who voted for Brexit was racist, but I'm yet to meet a racist who didn't vote for Brexit. It's a crucial distinction now. There is a big difference between saying everybody that voted for Brexit is racist to saying every racist I've ever met, and God knows I meet a lot. And not as many as I used to, though. But anyway, they all loved Brexit. And you remember Farage talking about people speaking foreign on trains? There it is there. They are talking about loosening the English language requirement in some sectors to enable more foreign workers into the country. And also changes, which I told you would have to happen, because I have the privilege of talking to real people every day. You speak to a farmer that can't get his turkeys plucked or his crops picked. What are they going to do? They're going to wait for a new generation of British school leavers to come out of school with a deep ambition to pluck turkeys? I don't know, maybe that's... But until that happens, who's going to pluck the I should use a different figure of speech here, because I could have a terrible verbal accident if I'm not careful with talking turkey plucking. Crops picking. Who's going to pick the crops? You need actual people to pick the crops. Seasonal workers. There's a cap of about 30 to 40. Hospitality is going to need something, I think. Everybody in hospitality tells me that they're
I
not
require a
operating at full
target.
capacity. They come out of lockdown desperate to start those wheels turning again, and yet they can't get the bodies. They cannot get the staff to do it. Downing Street sources said the government was not advocating an increase in immigration, but changes to the mix. And there's a quote, that will involve increasing numbers in some areas and decreasing in others. What areas are you going to decrease in? As the Prime Minister has made clear, we also want to see people who are economically inactive get back into work. So here is the politics of it. I think logic demands that we start trying to attract more people to this country than are currently coming. Oddly, the numbers suggest that Brexit hasn't actually reduced immigration much. It's just, in a sense, seen people come from countries that are not European anymore. So you remember the calls we used to get from people telling us they were going to vote for Brexit or they
I
supported
do not have a
Brexit
target.
because of all the brown faces behind the tills in their local Tesco. They have got the exact opposite of what they said they were voting for. The precise and polar opposite of what they said they were voting for. People told me that they had voted for Brexit because there were too many Muslims in this country. without acknowledging, it would appear, or understanding that there aren't any Muslim countries in the European Union. But we are now attracting people from other countries outside the European Union on a scale that has never been seen before. So that bit has failed, and we still need more. The social care sector needs to fill 105,000 posts. There's a shortfall of 40,000 nurses, at least 100,000 HGV drivers. They stand up in the House of Commons and boast about high employment. Johnson started it, Truss has continued it. They don't mention the fact that 2 million job vacancies were advertised last month. There are 2 million vacant jobs, and there are very, very few people registered unemployed who want these jobs. People have stepped back from the workplace. They've taken a lifestyle choice. They've changed, and some of them, of course, are very poorly. Some of them are too ill to work, but they still get counted in some of these numbers. So there are 2 camps now emerging in the Conservative cabinet. On the one side, you've got the people who've just tanked the pound and trashed our economy, saying that we need more immigration, and yet probably on this occasion having a point. And then on the other side, you've got the ones who are probably right also when they say, well, we're the party of Brexit. We're going to annoy all the racists that they're for us if we actually have to start increasing immigration. Just think about that for a minute. That is a distillation of a country on its knees, right? The people in power are arguing with each other over immigration because half of them know that they need the racists in order to sustain power, and the other half know that they need foreign workers to come here in order to have a wing and a prayer of the sort of economic growth that the country is in desperate need of. Here's the mad bit. Are you ready for this? I don't think you're ready for this. I think if you're driving, you better pull over or something. Or maybe sit down. Because this is huge. This is one of the maddest things that's ever happened in British politics. Because they're both right. Increase immigration, you will alienate all the racists who propelled Brexit over the line and the Tories into power. Don't get more foreign workers into this country, and you will jeopardise any chance at all of the sort of economic growth that the country needs to see. How mad is that? Just think about how mad that is for a minute. They're both right. So you've got Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman on one side saying no to immigration. We don't want any more immigrants. Don't point out their own family past. That ship has sailed. I think it's relevant. They don't. So, you know, on we go. So you've got that branch of the cabinet arguing against immigration because they are also the ones that call themselves anti-woke, which, as we've established on this programme, quite often means sympathetic to racist sensibilities. So they know that if you actually increase immigration, if these numbers, these visa restrictions come down, then the racists are going to be furious. And the thing you have to remember about racism politically is that it is self-harm. It is self-inflicted damage. It is a bigotry, a prejudice, a hatred that transcends self-interest. You hate that foreign person even more than you care about your own interests or your children's futures. That's why Brexit happened, because you were persuaded, not you personally, but people were persuaded to hate the foreigner, the person speaking a foreign language on a train, the people in Farage's despicable posters. You were persuaded to hate those people, those non-existent mythical people, more than you cared about your own future, your own interests, your own economic welfare. That's how you pull it off. So they are right, Braverman and Badenoch, and to a lesser extent, I think Rees-Mogg, who's sort of wobbling between the two positions. There it is. They are right. You will alienate a huge swathe of your racist base if you increase immigration, if you change the politics, the policies to make it easier for people to come here from overseas. But on the other hand, Kwarteng and Truss are right, that if you've got 2 million vacancies in an economy that's crying out for growth, and you do not have people here who are prepared to fill those vacancies, then you have to do something to tempt people from somewhere else to come here. So they are right as well. I'm going to level with you. I hadn't worked that out before I started talking. So it's rather shot the fox of whatever question it was that I was intending to ask you. I hadn't realised that they're both right. I mean, in many ways, they're both wrong. But in the clearest way, they're both right. They know they're going to alienate the racist base by increasing immigration. They know they can't possibly generate growth in a country with 2 million job vacancies and nowhere near enough people here to fill them unless they get people in from overseas. So what the hell am I going to ask you now? We've already done our Marvin Gaye topic for the day, haven't we? We've already had our what's going on. It's 14 minutes after 12. I don't know what to ask you. What do you think? Should I say, who's going to win? Who's going to win? Who's going to win? The anti-immigration lot in the current Conservative cabinet or the pro-immigration lot? As a Brexit voter, half of you told me that you just wanted controlled immigration. You didn't care what the overall numbers were. You just wanted more rules and regulations. The other half told me you categorically wanted fewer people to come here. But remember, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for, even as they voted for two completely different things. It was absolutely condescending and outrageous to suggest that there was no earthly way both camps were going to get what they wanted. So there it is. There it is. Braverman and Badenoch are correct. This will alienate racist support. And okay, if you find racism an uncomfortable badge to wear, let's just say anti-immigration then. Of course it will. If you're anti-immigration and they're saying we need more immigration, you're going to be very cross. But Kwarteng and Truss are right as well when they say we're in a country with 2 million job vacancies. If we can't get people to come here from somewhere else, we're never going to have the growth that we keep promising and talking about. I haven't got a topic. Let's see what happens. Okay, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. All right, if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. I've just described to you what I think is an irrefutable reality of British politics. You have a cabinet divided into two camps that are both correct but are disagreeing. Can you do that? Can you both be correct and yet contradict each other? It's like a political conundrum, this. It's like a sort of riddle. You've got two camps in the Conservative cabinet that are both correct and yet they are completely opposed to each other. Give me a call and say something intelligent on 034, or even just mildly amusing, on 0345 6060 973. Listen, if you need a proper hook to hang on a contribution, then just go for something like, how the hell is this going to play out? What does this tell us about modern Britain? What does it say about Brexit? One cabinet, one party, two camps, both correct, completely opposed to each other. Do you know, it's almost beautiful now, when you think about it, as a sort of philosophical construct or as a rhetorical flourish. Two camps, one cabinet, both correct, both completely opposed to each other. Go on, make some sense of that for me now. On 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And remember, the people who are desperately trying to get here, the people who are risking life and limb and handing over their life savings in the hope of coming here to get a job and build a better life, we're deporting them to Rwanda. Minutes after 10 is the time. Where to start? Seriously, where to begin? Oh, I really should have gone to Birmingham, shouldn't I? Honestly. Well, what a missed opportunity that was. I was in the Midlands at the weekend. I was in Kidderminster on Saturday, but I didn't get the clearance in. Well, to be honest, I didn't develop an appetite for actually being there until rather late last week, as I told you, but it must be a remarkable experience. I met a lad on Friday night who is a Conservative councillor in the London Borough of Hounslow. He was a lovely bloke. Didn't get too deep into politics or anything like that, otherwise perhaps I wouldn't have come away with such a warm impression. Very young, and he was off to a conference for his first time. In fact, I also met the Labour leader of Hounslow Borough Council, who just got back from his first ever conference. Imagine two more different experiences for local politicians, or politicians of any standing, than that. This, as a Conservative, this would be your first ever conference. What impressions could you possibly be coming away with? Or last week, as a Labour politician or a Labour activist, that was your first ever conference, just sort of queuing up opinion poll leads that were about to smash through the mythical 30-point barrier. Incredible to reflect upon how quickly the world turns from, in 2019, the worst defeat for the Labour Party in pretty much a century, give or take a decade and a half, right through now to unprecedented poll leads, which of course do not translate into election victories. Far from it. There's a lot of water to pass under a lot of bridges before we get to cast our votes again. Although perhaps not quite as much water or quite as many bridges as we possibly expected this time last month. So when did we first start asking whether or not Boris Johnson was toast? I don't think we did. I think I covered Boris Johnson for so long, from his mayoralty right through to his premiership, to the dog days of his premiership, that the traditional question of is this over, is this curtains, actually transmogrified quite early into how does he keep getting away with it? It did, didn't it? We didn't do is Johnson finished. We did, how does he keep getting away with it? How can someone who has ridden roughshod over all the norms and traditions, all the standards and expectations of high office, continue to transgress in such an egregious fashion without apparently any of it ever sticking to him? I think we started doing that before he'd even left City Hall in London, rather than doing the traditional political discussion about whether or not the writing is on the wall. Isn't it wonderful to hear Andrew Marr's dulcet tones on LBC talking there to Nick about the taking of soundings. We're taking soundings, and you can actually deliver the metaphorical revolver and the glass of scotch to a sitting Prime Minister and let them know that the writing is on the wall. They have lost the party. You'll remember, again, to draw contrast with Boris Johnson, that when it was suggested that the time had come for Boris Johnson to be handed a revolver and a glass of scotch, he'd probably shoot the person who handed him the revolver and then drink the scotch in celebration. But we seem to be at least tiptoeing towards normality in that sense, in the idea that no one's going to argue Liz Truss is Teflon. Teflon Truss is not a nickname I expect to be appearing anytime soon, and she has already lost the Daily Mail. Or at least the Daily Mail is teetering. The Daily Mail yesterday, and I know I do sometimes worry that you don't find all this stuff anywhere near as fascinating than I do. I am a son of a newspaper man, and I will have newsprint in my blood, I suspect, for the rest of my days. But to change the front page in one morning on the same day from a kind of, yes, we will stand firm, to, oh my days, there's going to be a U-turn. That will have really hurt the incredibly overdeveloped egos on the Daily Mail's editorial floor, because they have made the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and their commentators look even stupider than they make themselves look on a daily basis. And that, I have to tell you, is an astonishing achievement. Imagine taking someone who routinely appears on the Daily Telegraph's comment pages, like Frost, for example, and making him look even stupider than he makes himself look on a daily basis. That's quite incredible. The Daily Mail adamant at midnight yesterday. Was it midnight yesterday? Yeah, midnight today would be this morning, wouldn't it? And midnight yesterday would be yesterday. So at midnight yesterday, adamant that Kwasi Kwarteng was going to stand firm and that Liz Truss was not for turning. And then by the time the second edition of the newspaper came out, they'd had to wobble, they'd had to wibble, they'd had to reverse and reflect upon the U-turn that the government had undertaken. And there's another one that has unfolded overnight. I don't know if you're aware of this, but we discussed this quite a lot yesterday, actually. The idea that the Office of Budgetary Responsibility had moved from irrelevant and not worth consulting to relevant and worth consulting, but not publishing their findings until towards the end of next month, to relevant and worth consulting, and we will actually be publishing their findings much sooner than scheduled, because otherwise the markets are going to continue to be spooked. And then you've got Penny Mordaunt, who seems to be quite an interesting politician. I'm not sure I was aware of her before the leadership campaign began to unfold. I knew her name, and did she do a reality show involving diving, like swimming pool diving? They don't call it swimming pool diving, do they? There's only really one kind of diving, at least one kind of diving you can talk about on a family programme. Splash it was called, wasn't it? Yes. So that was all I really knew about her. I think she might have been in the Royal Navy, and she did a speech once where she smuggled in words as a sort of bet. She was going to get lots of, not quite naughty words, but slightly inappropriate words into a parliamentary speech as a sort of, so she seems like quite a game girl. We'll be talking about casual sexism later in the programme, by the way, in case you were wondering. So I wasn't like fully aware of her before now. I think that was just her texting me there. Did anyone hear that ping? She's quite upset with me for not being previously aware of her high-profile political career, but she's already swung at Truss on this benefits thing. I'd be very surprised if there isn't a climb down on this. The problem is it wouldn't, well, not the problem, but the point is that it wouldn't actually be a U-turn. Let me tell you what I think is happening, and as you'll know if you're a regular listener to this programme, I haven't been wrong about any of this stuff since 2016, but I'm bound to be wrong soon, so, you know, pull up a seat and enjoy the moment when it actually occurs. The intention is clearly not to raise benefits in line with inflation, which was a manifesto pledge in 2019 in that mythical defeat, that victory of just 3 years ago when Boris Johnson secured an 80-seat majority. He did so on a manifesto pledge to not let benefits fall behind inflation. In other words, the people with the lowest incomes in the entire country will not be rendered even worse off than they are already. That was essentially the pledge. And I'm pretty clear, and I think you are as well, that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng intended to abandon, possibly still intend to abandon that pledge. They have a £43 billion hole. And the best thing that they need to fill, they need to explain where these tax cuts are going to come from. 2 days ago it was a £45 billion hole, but they've now stopped plans to give people like me £2 billion back in tax cuts. They've still got £43 billion worth of tax cuts on current expenditure that they need to find. Where do you think they're going to go for it? They've already rejected windfall taxes on big companies. They've already reversed U-turn on tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country. If you look at someone who was giving tax cuts wanted to give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the country, how do you think they're going to feel about the poorest people in the country? Yeah, exactly. So I give you any odds you wanted that they were intending, and possibly still are. So this refusal to commit, and I'll play you her talking to Nick in a moment on this very specific issue, her refusal to commit to this policy, to pledge that they won't be doing it, means that they are intending to do it. They're just reading, they're just waiting, they're just hoping that by the time the end of November comes around, is it November the 23rd that this speech, that Kwarteng is going to do this statement, that by then they will be able to get away with the idea of abandoning that manifesto pledge, and crucially I think rendering the poorest people in the country even poorer than they are already. I think they would do it in a heartbeat if they thought they could get away with it. I think that the long shadow of this 45p tax cut is going to stalk and haunt them for their entire regime, because they will always be the people that looked at a cost of living crisis, that looked at an energy bills catastrophe, that looked at a country in serious economic peril and thought, I know what we'll do, let's give the richest people more money than they currently have. So the idea that they would balk at taking money away or rendering poorer the poorest people in society is absolutely credible and comprehensible. So that's where I think we are. Here she is on that specific issue, on that question of whether or not another U-turn would be on the way, or the abandonment of a 2019 manifesto pledge, or crucially, and remember these words, taking the poorest people in society and ensuring that they become even poorer as a government policy, as a Liz Truss policy, as an example of Trussonomics. And you tell me what you hear in this exchange.
There'll be more U-turns on this budget.
I'm absolutely determined
on this budget,
to press ahead with this growth plan. The vast majority of it,
respectfully, that's not
we've already...
Will there be more U-turns on this mini-budget? You've got Ben Houchen saying you need to reverse the policy regarding bankers' bonuses.
Well, that is not part of this mini-budget. This mini-budget is all about how do we help on energy bills.
Will there be more U-turns?
I'm determined to carry on with this growth package.
Okay.
That's what's important. But it's also important, Nick, that we do listen to people and we bring the country with us.
So there could be more U-turns.
I'm not saying that at all. And we've already implemented, we've already implemented the biggest part of the package. The biggest part of the package, if you remember, people were facing energy bills of up to £6,000. We have fixed that. This October, we have made sure that the typical family isn't paying more than £2,500.
Well, you will
that
if you
was
use
the biggest
more power,
part
of course, but we have
this
to say.
package.
All right.
So again, I'm confused. I'm always a little bit wary of sharing my confusion completely with you in case I am just being a bit thick. But why does the energy package come up here? The energy package costs money. And the tax cuts cost money as well. So how can she say the tax cuts are a consequence of the energy bill help? So here is a bunch of money to help you pay your energy bills. You have to pay it back via various means. But here also is a bunch of tax cuts. But it should be the other way around. You say in order to pay for the energy bailout, if you like, in order to pay for the help with the energy bills, we need to put taxes up, or we need to find the money from somewhere else. I'm not going mad, am I? That just doesn't make any sense at all. The banker's bonus there is a bit of a red herring. That's got nothing to do effectively with plugging the 45 billion or 43 billion pound hole. It's more about what they believe will be an air of entrepreneurial flair. But the bottom line here is that we're looking at a Prime Minister who I think is already, all right, I'll say it, I think she's done for already. And that's my introduction this morning. And the question inevitably is, do you think she is I mean, 52-48, all right? I'm going to use the infernal ratio. It gives me a little bit of wiggle room. I can't see her coming back from this. When you put all of these factors together, the U-turns, the loss of face, the humiliation, the criticism, the dissent, the noise, the atmosphere, the fact that she didn't have the support of the parliamentary party in the first place, the fact that she is abandoning manifesto papers that delivered an 80-seat majority, the fact that the culture wars appear to have gone quiet, if you like, the Daily Mail. It's astonishing how public attitudes to welfare claimants and asylum seekers soften when the Daily Mail is screaming about them every single day. It's just not happening. Sarah Bradman is going to try and reignite those fires of fury later today by going after asylum seekers, but it's not going to be enough, is it, to distract attention from the economic debacle unleashed upon the country just 1 week ago. So come at it from any angle you want, and give me as much detail as you want, as much thinking as you want, but do you think Liz Truss is already finished? Is this premiership, what's the phrase? Is it dead below the waterline? Hold below the waterline? Is she, in political terms, a dead woman walking? Is the whole shebang already over and done with? I think it is. But by 11 o'clock today, I reserve the right to undertake a U-turn. They're very fashionable this week. I don't know how we do this. I don't know if I want to do this, but all right, just bear with, okay? A bit of stream of consciousness. Well, it's always stream of consciousness, but let me talk to you briefly about where some of the inspiration is coming from. So let's begin with a tweet off a mate, with a message off a mate last night. Just sort of things to think about, things that might make you think. You're probably well aware of this already, mate, but we were just taken off a flight from Porto because the British end was unable to handle a scheduled inbound flight full mainly of Brits from our oldest global ally. The couple next to us with a baby had been trying to get via London to Dubai for 2 days, and then he uses some rather Anglo-Saxon language and wonders whether I'm aware of the extent of the problem because of the job that I do for a living. So you have a little look at flights. Cancellations. BA cancelled 10,000, I think, yesterday out of Heathrow in the coming months. Gatwick yesterday announced that everything's going to be getting back to normal, and 10 minutes later announced the cancellation, I think, of 26 flights because so many air traffic control people were off sick. So staff shortages continue to impact upon that sector. Then you've got the front page of the City AM newspaper, which is, I mean, it literally describes itself on the masthead as London's business newspaper. It's quite good these days. It used to be an absolute skipfire. I forget the name of the bloke that used to edit it, but he was a hardcore Brexiter. Imagine being a financial journalist and being pro-Brexit. It speaks of an ignorance on a level that would probably get you a job in the cabinet. So the front page of City AM today is bad news. This is it. They've just put bad news in 4-inch high big black letters. Bad news, pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. And then good news, Crossrail to fully open in November, which is relatively good news if you're a commuter working in London. That's not a joke. I mean, that is it. I think they may have nicked the idea off us. I don't know if you remember last week, we announced that we were going to start the programme every day with some good news. And by the second day of the scheme, of the plan, we couldn't find any. So we had to drop the feature even before it had begun. But that's City AM, London's business newspaper. Bad news, pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Good news, Crossrail 2 fully open in November. And then, because I work very hard on your behalf, as we have discussed recently, putting in proper sort of coal miner style shifts for you on a daily basis, I also consult, when I can, some foreign media. In fact, usually I get sent links to relevant stories by my brilliant listeners, and some of my now in excess of one.
Do I really want to do the quest? No.
Granny!
Not really.
Mostly dry further south and a low of 8. Showers moving across England and Wales tomorrow with sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Highs of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Very good evening. It's 8 on LBC. I'm Ian Dale. Now, if you listen to the programme regularly, you'll know that on Thursdays at 8, we like to spend a bit of time with one person, because so often in the media nowadays it's just sort of 5-minute interviews and nobody really gets a chance to expand on what they want to say. Well, in this hour we talk to someone for an hour and you get your chance to put questions to them as well. Well, today we're going to be talking to Steve Hartshorn. He's the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. He's served in the Metropolitan Police since 1995, and if you have a question for him, we'd love to put that to Steve. 0345 6060 973. We're also streaming this hour live on Global Player and Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, you're a relatively newbie in the job, aren't you? I mean, what does the job involve?
Oh, it's huge. It's massive. I became the national chair in April this year, and it's bigger than I thought it was. Certainly, it's not a 40-hour week. I can say that for certain. It's a complete change of anything I've ever done before in policing. In terms of engagement with central government, senior figures who can have a real positive effect in policing, that's the biggest challenge for me to get to grips with it. It's a learning curve that if the post is for 3 years, it just won't stop. Every day something new happens to make me think. And
tell us a bit about your background, because as I say, you served in the Met since 1995. Tell us about the different jobs that you did.
I started in Barking and Dagenham in East London in 1995 and spent dealing with every kind of crime you could possibly wish to imagine. At one time, Barking and Dagenham had the biggest council estate in Europe, and it was involved with residential burglary, domestic crime, commercial burglary. Not so much sort of street robbery at the time, but that became quite prolific. Anything you can wish to imagine. I got good grounding in how to deal with the public. I then had aspirations to move on to the Firearms Command, so in 2005 I passed my armed response vehicle course and went to Leman Street in East London and spent 13 years there on armed response, again dealing with a different level of crime, in dealing anything from threats to kill to the immediate threat to life and some of the counter-terror jobs that came in. And then finally got a posting to the National Federation in 2018, and the rest is history.
Tell us about the armed response unit. I mean, how often would you get called out in an average week?
When you're on shift, I mean, we did 10-hour shifts then, and every single day something was happening. There was always calls from members of the public to someone seen in possession of a gun, someone acting strangely with a knife or a weapon, and you have to take these calls seriously. So at the time when I first joined, we were quite a small unit. We could only maybe put out 5 or 6 armed response vehicles on a shift, Towards the end, sadly, because of the events in Paris at the Bataclan, we could then start to put out maybe 25 to 30 units a day. But there's always a challenge, there's always something there, and even if it was potentially quiet for a few hours, there was always a good opportunity to go back, support our colleagues on the front line, and just deal with other types of crime where they might need an extra pair of hands.
And what's the psychological effect of doing
The
a job
mountain
like that?
gives us
Because,
life,
I mean,
grants
in
us
theory,
strength.
any day.
The same
could be
blood
curtains.
that flows
If you're
through our veins
having a big
flows
conversation
through
all the time,
Azeroth
facing
as
one
well.
person. And that's not
Upon
just
hammer
pressure
and
on you,
anvil,
it's also your
our kingdom was
Absolutely,
forged,
it's
with
quite
hearts
literally
afire
challenging.
and wills of
Physically, it's very impactful, but also mentally, you go to work thinking, I'm going to do a job of work today, I'm going out there to do the very best I can. And what I will say, some of the training that we get is first class. I would put it against anybody's training in the world. It really equips you to deal with most of the scenarios that you're going to face. However, the public don't get the training, they don't get the same briefing, so they don't know how to react necessarily to what we do. At times it looks very chaotic, but when you've trained to that high degree with a team of people that you literally trust with your life, it works. And again, you do the best you can, and I do think every time we get it pretty much spot on. It might involve a lot of coarse language which the public might not appreciate. However, it's far better to be a little bit industrial than to actually have to pull the trigger or use another potentially lethal use of force on somebody if it means everybody is safe.
And one other thing related to that, so often when there is when the police officer shoots someone dead, they seem to be immediately under investigation, and people assume that they somehow are guilty. And I often think to myself, why would anyone do this job? Because you're on a hiding to nothing. If you, I mean, it is a split-second decision that you have to take. You have been trained, so you hopefully won't get it wrong sort of very, very often. But there are so many suspicions now that it is the police that are at fault in these incidents, rather than the person that, for whatever reason, has been shot.
You're absolutely right, and hindsight is an exact science which we tend to get judged by almost immediately. People perhaps make ill-informed comments based on what they think they know, based on something in social media, and they get it completely wrong. And all we've ever asked for is just to be allowed to have the time and space to do our evidential accounts, and that's how I became a FedRep, believe it or not, because having been involved in some very high-profile jobs and then begin to understand what officers go through, I want to know more. And it might assist the listeners to understand there's a set process which we call it's the Firearms APP, the Authorised Professional Practice, and it's broken down to 4 stages, where the first time, once a bullet has been discharged or something's happened where it needs investigating because of a police use of force, we give an initial account of the radio, so we call for support. We then return to a PIP, a post-incident location, where a set of facts is given to a senior officer, which gives a very brief outline of why we're there and what's taking place. And then probably within 5 or 6 hours, the officers have done a stage 3 account, which is their first personal initial account, and then they put down maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs as to the reason why they're there, what they've done, and some of the circumstances. And then because it's usually quite traumatic for everybody involved, and to allow the body to come to terms with that trauma, the physical impact, the mental impact, and the brain to sort of settle down, they then generally go away for 2 periods of sleep, normally 48 hours. However, depending on the circumstances, it might be shorter, it might be longer. And then they come back for what's called a stage 4, which is a full detailed account. And that's where they can spend 10, 12, 18 hours writing or typing that full account to make sure they cover everything as much as they can. And I can say hand on heart, for me, it's the best process ever to get a really good, transparent, open, in-depth account of everything they think they've done. Obviously, body-worn video was, to us, a great asset, because it then shows for the first time ever the actions that we do. However, it's not always the utopian answer, because it's very one-dimensional. So we encourage our colleagues to, when they are writing their account, use the body-worn video if they're allowed to watch it, and quite often they're not, to really... Well, we also have the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, who quite rightly provide oversight for our actions to make sure that we're doing things properly and in accordance with the law, powers, policy and regulations. At times they may say, no, you can't view that body-worn video for a variety of reasons. Perhaps they think it might prejudice our accounts, they don't want it to taint what we're saying, which is understandable to a degree. However, if you dig into the science of memory, it doesn't record in a linear fashion like it does on a video or a data stick, so you don't always remember things perfectly. And when we've done the stage 3 account, we've already alluded to some of the things that we think you can recall. So for me, the perfect scenario would be they do their written account, they can then have a period of time to watch the body-worn video, and then if their memory recollection is significantly different, say, here's what I thought I recalled on day-day time place, and then I've now had an opportunity to view the account. However, I can see it's different, but my honest held belief at that time was that is what took place. And if you then, if I was to ask you if you've witnessed an event to do an account, you'd probably remember most of it, but things might be different. And if I then showed you that on a video, you go, how did I not see that? Because we have things like selective attention, auditory exclusion, where for us as a police officer, you naturally look to the threat which is going to cause you or the member of the public the most. So you focus on that to try and eliminate and deal with that threat as safely as you can.
Best mind your manners in the press. Many of our people have
academics have said that
advised
if you're
against
looking at something
journeying
you
to
don't
the
hear something
surface.
properly, and vice
But the
versa, if you hear
brave
something
know
you don't always see it
better.
properly. So there's
Now
lots
is
of
the
learning that
time
we've had in the firearms
for the
world,
dark
which has got
iron
to
to
a place where,
emerge
like a
from the
hybrid approach,
shadows.
do our accounts, watch the video,
Azeroth
provide
awaits you
further, and then
with
of course we all know that
Stormwind,
ultimately
the
we'll
first
either have to
spark
go
of the
to,
anvil.
Crown Court and request a written public inquiry. We have nothing against being open, honest and transparent in everything we do as a police officer, which is the right thing to do.
See, I'd rather predict when I asked you about firearms, because I've got a text here from Nick who says, Ian, whatever the police go through, it cannot be as bad as what Jean-Charles de Menezes' family went through or are going through. He says he's a Mother Island veteran. I'm not sure what, I don't know if you know what that means. And it often comes back to that, doesn't it? And it's obviously a tragedy that happened. And there's one of the other incidents where we think back to the Mark Duggan incident, which set off the London riots, and yet people don't, and whatever concerns there were about that, people don't see the day-to-day issues that you get involved with, and they automatically assume that the police are trigger happy, and therefore people lose their lives sort of needlessly. Why do you think people, and I don't mean everybody, but I mean certain groups of people automatically will take the side of whoever is against the police?
That's a great question, and I wish I could understand that, because if it did, I wouldn't be a police officer. I've been making a lot of money in dealing with the communication side of it. I think some of it is a lack of understanding about what our role actually is, about the threat, harm and risk that we face, and like you said, the day-to-day jobs that we do. My colleagues will have been out there on armed response today, dealing with hundreds of events across the country, and it largely goes very, very smoothly. I think if you look at some of the figures, it's we actually discharge the firearms 0.1% time we actually deploy, which is a really incredibly small
0.1%.
Yeah, percent of the time we pull the trigger. I think on average, when I was involved on the armed response, we would probably have 2 shootings a year.
Did you ever have to shoot?
I haven't. Thankfully, I haven't had to do so, because it is very impactful. Even if you're stood next to a colleague that does affect you. It does make you think. It does make you wonder, why do we do this job? Even our legal advisors, our solicitors and barristers who speak to us say, why? We would advise you not to do it. It is so risky. However, somebody has to. It's a great job to do. It makes a real difference. When you're taking down hardcore organised criminals that are inflicting pain and suffering on the community, when you can take them away from that, you can really improve lives, and that's why it's worth it. It's nice to get involved in something that makes a real difference, and there is no one else to do it.
Do you get frustrated sometimes by the depiction of the police in dramas? Because I mean, half of the dramas on television seem to be surrounding something to do with policing from all different parts of the country. Do you watch these and you think, if only you knew the truth? Because, I mean, I suppose we all get our impressions of what policing is like, or indeed like the security services. I mean, I loved Spooks, but everyone I know who's involved in that said, I mean, it's fiction, and you have to treat it as fiction.
Yeah.
But you kind of think, well, it must be based on something.
It is, and I find it incredibly frustrating. I used to watch them all, and then I go the Rising, and I think, why do the advisors not tell the producers do it properly?
Yeah.
And then a colleague of mine became an advisor on a set, and he basically said, look, they tell them all this to get it right, to get it done properly. But obviously, they want dramatic effect. And a term I coined sort of during my time as a Federation rep on the team was, we've got the Hollywood effect. Is people believe what's done on the film that we can do, quite often we get so why don't you shoot the gun out of their hand? If you're 30, 40 metres away with a hand pistol or even a rifle, it can be incredibly hard if they're moving. We have to stop the threat as quick as we can to stop potentially someone else being killed or seriously injured. So it's not quite as good as it looks in the films, and it is frustrating, and I just try to remember that it isn't real. But again, when we've done work with people such as yourselves in the media world and take them down to our training facility in Kent and they see what we do, they get it, they understand it, and we can put them on what's called the judgment range and let them have a go themselves at dealing with a shoot or no shoot scenario.
I can guarantee you that if I did that, I'd make the wrong decision every single time.
You'd be surprised.
And I used to own a gun, I can fire a gun, but yeah. I suspect I'd be useless at it.
It's challenging because not only are you trying to do with the physical and tactical aspect of what you're doing, you're trying to think about the backdrop, your powers, your policy, the legislation. Is it the right thing to do? What age of the person to engage? Because my biggest fear is at some point, and I take no pleasure in saying this, there is going to probably be a child that's going to be involved in the shooting. That is going to be heartbreaking, not least for the people of the family involved, also the farms officers, and we are acutely aware of that. You mentioned it before on the text from your listener. Some of the post-incident process we've had was brought in because we realised that we needed to get the accounts over quickly to give the family that understanding of what's taking place.
Controversial territory here, so you might want to think before you answer this one. Brian says, ask Steve if he would take the current Mayor of London out on a job and ask the Mayor how they should treat the incident.
I would love to. If I was operational, I would love to take the Mayor out on a job. I would take anybody out so they can see the hard work we do and the decisions.
When you say take the Mayor out?
Physically as opposed to tactically, no. It's look, we have to improve people understanding what we do, and if the locally called ride-alongs, yes, we would love to, because that way they can actually see what we do and understand it properly.
Right, I have a lot more to ask you, but we're going to come to your calls as well. 0345 6060973. You can text your question to 84850 or tweet at LBC or at Ian Dale. We're with Steve Hartshorn. If you've only just tuned in, he's the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Just... Leading Britain's conversation. Ian Dale. Tweet at LBC.
20 past 8 on LBC. Steve Hartshorn is with me, National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Some breaking news from the AFP news agency. Joe Biden is going to pardon anyone convicted of federal marijuana possession. I'm not quite sure I understand what federal marijuana possession means. I suppose under a federal crime, but why would it be a federal crime rather than the local one? I suppose the obvious question there, Steve, is should the UK follow suit?
Interesting question, and I think it's something that the public should be engaged with fully so that we can understand what they need. Certainly as police officers we have to follow the law and we'll do what we are legally supposed to do. Practically wise, I think if you were to ask most police officers, they've probably had far more violence and troubles with alcohol and alcohol abuse than they probably have with marijuana or cannabis.
Because there are some police forces, I think Durham is one, where they basically said, we're not going to bother with prosecuting people for, as long as it is for your own personal use, we're not going to do it, which caused a lot of controversy at the time because people say, well, the law, it is illegal under the law, so therefore if it's illegal, you should be taking it to the full extent of the law. And I mean, I can see the argument on both sides here.
Yeah. For me, if you're going to deal with personal possession, you're going to take an officer or two officers off the streets where they need to be. And if I was to walk out here tonight and probably go through Leicester Square, you could probably smell it within the first 10, 15 metres.
You can.
Yeah.
I said on the programme the other night when we were talking about whether cannabis should be classed as Class A rather than Class B. I said I was walking through Leicester Square and the person with me said, oh my God, can't you smell the cannabis?
Yeah.
And I couldn't, but I don't know why, I just can't. I don't even know what it smells like. But it is so prevalent along a lot of streets of London, I'm told.
It is, and if you were to walk and you were to arrest the first person you came across, that's going to take you 2, 3, 4 hours maybe, depending on the state of the person. They might have to go to hospital. It then takes you away from what you need to be doing. So I'd ask the government, before they think about changing any legislation, to actually have a proper public consultation, see what they want us to be doing, because that's who we're there to serve and look after.
Now, we have a new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark. Is it Rowley or Rowley? I think it's Rowley, but that's what I'm going to stick to unless you know any different. Sadiq Khan was on LBC. He said what Londoners will see is a difference in response from this commissioner who's not in denial, who's not being defensive, versus the previous one, and that's one of the reasons I lost confidence in her. I don't know if you want to comment on the circumstances surrounding Cressida Dick's dismissal, but are we going to see a real new broom in Sir Mark Rowley?
I think we'll see a different broom. I was listening to the show this morning and I believe the Mayor Khan called him a reforming commissioner. My only experience of working with Sir Mark Rowley was during the Duggan shooting when he was in charge of that command area, and he seemed to be very understanding. He seemed to want to balance the role of the police to make sure that we were getting it right, but also speak to the community to help understand what had taken place. And I think every new person in charge, much like myself included, wants to put their own mark on what they're doing, and there is a time and a place that we probably did need a reset in standards. We need a culture change within policing across the country. We also need resources to be able to do that properly, because if you've got people that feel they can't speak out, there's nowhere to go, then it becomes an endemic inside the service that we need to change very, very quickly.
Let's talk a little bit about standards, because Dame Louise Casey has been doing a report, I think, for Sadiq Khan on misogyny within the Met, and these WhatsApp groups where I haven't seen the messages, but I think we can all imagine what they are. Do you think the problem is as big as the Mayor does?
If I'm honest, I don't think it is. I think you've got isolated pockets that need to be dealt with quickly, swiftly, and that kind of culture has no place in policing. One, it's wrong. Two, it shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be police officers. If they can't go to work and be professional, they shouldn't be a police officer. Simple as that. There is no place for it. It undermines public confidence. And what kind of person are they? How are they going to deal with somebody? Because if they're typing some of that stuff that we hear about, and I've not seen it either, then it does make me question, can they deal with someone impartially and fairly, or are they going to use those prejudiced views for nefarious means?
There's been another story today, hasn't there, about somebody who serves in the Border Force who used to be a police officer, and there are serving police officers within this WhatsApp group which is full of, as I've read, racist remarks. Now, technology does provide the opportunity for like-minded people to share things between them, but what gets me is the stupidity of it, in that they must realise that if this sort of thing comes out, they are toast, or they should be toast.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Stupidity. They didn't realise, they didn't think, it's inappropriate, and they shouldn't be doing it. Simple as that. Even if it's off duty, they should all realise now that these groups, all it takes is one person to be caught and have the phone downloaded, and the history is there for everybody to see. I've said it before, there is no place for it whatsoever, and it should be dealt with very swiftly, appropriately as well, and to make sure that we can't have those kind of views in what we do.
Let's talk about burglaries, because over the last few years it's been a complaint of many people that they've been burgled and the police just aren't interested, don't respond, nothing has happened, that they know that they're not going to solve it. Now, the head of the National Police Chiefs Council, Martin Hewitt, has said that all burglaries will now be attended to. Is that the right thing?
Absolutely. Certainly when I joined as a junior police officer, we did attend every single burglary, because it was important that if you look at some of the operating methods of burglars, you might have one or two prolific burglars in your area, and they're responsible for probably 90–95% of those types of crime. So if you can get there, if you've got a chance to catch them, you can solve so many problems. It's also good for community engagement, because we had a policy years ago. You go to a burglary in a dwelling, you deal with the house it was, you'd learn your craft at how to investigate a crime, you get a scene to crime officer down, but you'd also go and knock on doors either side. You'd at least do a minimum of 4 doors either side, 4 doors opposite. People are creatures of habit, and if you go when the burglary happened, try and go to the time, replicate that the following day, you've got some good evidence. To me, it's crucial, and it was disappointing that it took that long for a collective decision to be made across the NPCC for that to be a priority. However, I have concerns, because whenever we get something that has to be taken away, and I believe that if you look at the national standards for county rules for burglary, it not only includes burglary dwelling, but also includes sheds and outbuildings. Now, you take over COVID, people have invested probably quite a lot of money in a home studio, maybe something built at the bottom of the garden if they're lucky enough to have a garden. That's got a fortune's worth of kit in it, their computers, their technology and other things, because they're working from home. So if we're only going to attend as a priority at burglary in a house, we might be doing a disservice to someone that's got tens of thousands of pounds of kit in a shed or an outbuilding. It needs looking at properly, because my fear is that they're going to not count shed and outbuilding burglaries, so they're going to focus primarily on burglary dwellings. That's going to artificially inflate the detection rate for some, or that we've attended calls. It's a bit of smoke and mirrors, and I hope it's more than a headline. It needs a real substance to look at what that means.
I'm sure you've heard about this multiple stabbing in the City of London this morning. 3 men were stabbed as they tried to tackle some robbers who I think were trying to steal a mobile phone from somebody. They were on a motorbike. That actually happened to me not that long ago, and I mean, it happens and you think, oh, what was that? It just happens in a snapshot. And anyway, 3 people tackled these robbers and got stabbed for doing it. And I think everyone would think, well, that they were quite heroic in doing that. But is the advice still not to get involved? Because obviously I don't know the condition of the people who were stabbed, but they put themselves in harm's way, and we would all think they were heroes. But often you hear from the police, well, actually, you shouldn't really do that.
We do, and sometimes I feel frustrated, because when the public don't see visible policing around, they feel need to act themselves. And I always say to most people, don't get involved, be a good witness. Ironically, we criticise people for taking their phone out and recording something, but there's a time and a place when you have to step in. I suppose the difference for us as trained professionals with hopefully the right kit and equipment is we've had the training to understand how quickly someone can take a knife out, stab somebody and run away in the blink of an eye, quite literally. At the time, they probably unconsciously made what they thought was a dynamic risk assessment, thinking they could get involved. However, they're probably not aware of the circumstances, and sadly they've been stabbed. And I'd offer my sincere thanks for trying to do what they thought was the right thing, and I hope they make a speedy recovery.
Well, I haven't got through all of the subjects I wanted to talk to you about, but we've got half an hour to go. But I'm going to devote that to callers putting questions directly to you. All people who send in texts, 84850 is the text, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to talk to Steve. He's National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Never forget, we are streaming this whole hour on Global Player. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Tim Daly.
The Prime Minister has refused to guarantee we won't have to live with planned blackouts this winter. Liz Truss has been speaking after the National Grid warned they may be needed because of gas shortages if the worst came to the worst. A group of celebrities and public figures are starting legal actions against the publishers of the Daily Mail. Claims of gross breaches. Acting for the group, which includes Sir Elton John, Prince Harry and Baroness Doreen Lawrence, although the newspapers is yet to comment. The United States has taken a step towards decriminalizing marijuana. President Biden has granted an unconditional pardon to people convicted of possessing the drug. LBC weather. Showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight, but mostly dry further south and a low of 8. Showers moving across England and Wales tomorrow, with sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Highs of 18 degrees.
LBC.
Is streaming this program live on Global Player, so we hope you are. You can National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Andy from Edgware. Andy, hi, what would you like to say?
Too far away.
I'm just wondering how this person help off anybody. No trust. Well, how are you going to trust them?
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Where you've been let down by the police, for which I need to understand the more before making a comment. If it's in relation to the general issues around thinking that you've got policing issues, those things need fixing absolutely, because what I would say to the members of the corporate police is, we as police officers want to do the absolute best that we can to help you. We'll do everything we can to work with other agencies to get you the most over there. We're there to help, so please don't try to get with it, and if you need help, please get help.
But why do you think people, okay, it might be personal circumstances if you've had a bad experience with the police, but do you think maybe highlight some things and you're going to what so important? For instance, why on earth chasing people who said hurting people on Twitter rather than chasing real criminals? People think this should be priority.
Yes, I think
barnacle bottom swine!
to what they're going to call the person. offended or smirched, be it so for me, I want people to take advice because I don't want anybody to feel like but I accept that once we say it's not a crime, police, I mean, some of the in relation to our social media, I think it's a degree of maybe trying to fill a gap with that information because we're not always the only people that provide information now. We people have their own YouTube accounts, their own Instagram, TikTok, I think sometimes we need to just stop police and other authorities the time they need because historically we've had camera crews done it to jobs live streaming some of it's taken potentially showing tactics which again we have nothing to hide about what we do, but if that's then being streamed to the people within the building or people we're trying to deal with, they see what we're doing and sometimes we just need nothing to be shown at all so we can operate safely because we want to try and resolve those incidents as safely and as speedy as we can given the confines of what we're dealing with.
Does that happen often?
It used to happen quite a lot and I believe there's been some work done now at national level, certainly at national level to speak to some of the big please have a discount as such. Oh, don't report certain people, don't show certain things because that might be what it was. However, safe and effective for that kind of do or may do.
6060. And Mark, thank you very much. Mark is in Birmingham. Hello, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. For me, one of the aspects is using stop and search, which I know is controversial at times. I'd like to think we always should intelligence-led stop and search.
Water below, you barnacle-bottom swine!
You just don't have the information. And for me, when I was an operational police officer out on the streets of London, or indeed on mutual aid at any part of the country, sometimes you get a very, very scant description of the suspect, what they're wearing, what they're looking like. When we have high visibility policing days, that has a marked effect on street crime because it does deter, dissuade and prevent crime from taking place. I know some of the sentencing is supposed to be quite stringent if you're possession of what's termed a zombie knife or a great big killer knife. I honestly don't think people think about that at the time. Sometimes they have a misguided sense of it's for self-protection. I think if you look at some of the history around that, the injuries they get are probably inflicted with their own knives. I wish I had the answer to it. I think there's more education that needs to be done about the dangers of knife crime. For me, I'd like to see more police officers out on the streets 24 hours a day. I think that does have a noticeable effect on the way people act and commit crime.
Avast, you bill suckers!
An amnesty or something like that, or I don't know. I really don't know. I'm really worried about my two children going out there. You know, it's crazy. It's got to be.
It is.
I think the
Come about and scuttle your hide!
Sustainable funding, more police officers out there. I think we need to look at policing actually
oh, don't crack your teacup!
Bigger education piece. Amnesties, I do believe amnesties. So you can't compensate with a knife. Relatively easy again. One, if you're underage, one
looks like someone still ain't got sea legs!
We can do.
You won't soon be forgetting that!
Have a conversation with them. Try to doing it because
this one's going right in your deadline!
Difficult. I really wish I had a magic answer though. It's got so much energy.
Get
you? We haven't got any other landing in school. What would you like to ask?
You smell like parrot guano!
I suppose this question develops on the whole trust and confidence in police. My question is, what kind of resources have been invested in police services up and down the country, nationally and locally, around anti-racism training?
I generally wish I had the answer across the whole of policing. I can only talk about the training that I was given as in the Met Police when I was there on team. And we would have regular digital learning packages to talk about racism, what it means, what not to do. I think we miss a trick by not engaging with the community properly. Something that we've called for is protected learning time. At the National Federation of England and Wales, we have our own protected learning time policy, where we're saying that if you do anything in relation to a police duty, you should have some bespoke time where you can educate to get it right. We'd like that brought across the country. When I was on the firearms team, I had to do 20 hours before I could go out to the street to carry. We'd like to do education to do more to do out. The best one in the world is first thing you go with training days and training. If you can educate your workforce in a better way, it's got to help them because you can understand they might go for that for years and years and years. We want to stop it. The last thing we want is people to feel vulnerable and threatened. And if there's more we can do, I'd say we need to work with communities in a better way to have a joint approach to stamp it out.
And do Black and Asian officers go on these courses too?
Everybody does.
I'm talking about anti-racism in terms of how police see possibly young black boys in terms of work that focus around adultification and anti-racism through the eyes, through the lenses of maybe some of the white male and female police officers. So yes, there's anti-racism in terms of community and racial abuse, absolutely, but I'm talking about the anti-racist training that police officers themselves receive in terms of their work and policing communities, different black and global majority communities. That's really what I'm talking about.
What do you think's going on at the moment, Amanda?
A lot. The adultification of young black men, the stop and search, the assumptions that are made, just the horrific events that have happened over the past few years, and some of the inherent racism, some of the lack of understanding of the communities in which the police officers serve leads them to probably come with preconceived ideas about black and global majority citizens. So it is like...
I am out of range.
Global majority. Just explain that.
Global majority derives from the idea that 85% of the global population is actually black or brown. So it's been minoritized. It is through the minoritized that we are seen as somewhat inferior, less than, or more targeted. So I don't subscribe to minority because it is thing that black people with the global majority have been minoritized. So it is about black and global majority people and their experiences that they face at the hands of the police officers who are there to serve them. A lot of the children in school don't feel protected. They don't feel that the police are there to protect them. And that's a sad indictment. I just come from a governing board meeting where a head teacher said she won't allow the police officers back on campus. She doesn't believe that they've learned anything. And that's
That's quite something to hear. mustn't just restrict this to London as well. Do you understand where Amanda's coming from there?
I do, and I've heard it for a very long time. And when I joined the job at Hendon, I remember we had an input on race relations. I think it was probably mid-course, so it was probably week 8 or 9 of the training. And you remember it, and it's impacted. And if you, I think at times people forget that we keep halting these. For me, it's education and training and regular updates. It's disappointing that the schools won't allow officers back in because that's a breakdown of communication. We have to learn, we have to engage. We need to hear the whole truth and truth at times before people accept that if they're doing something wrong and they're not anti-racist, then we need to get with the programmes, we need to learn and develop and understand. If there's more we can do, then that's absolutely right, we need to do it.
What percentage of serving officers are non-racist?
I don't have the figures for next week. I think within policing, I think it's about 40%, but
reflect the general population, I think. I mean, I don't have the Met Police numbers to hand, because I think that is where a lot of the issues stem from, particularly because I think I'm right in saying that the non-white population in the London area is 40%. So you would expect, if you were going to reflect the local communities, certainly it ought to be up in that area, but I'm not sure the recruitment is at the moment. Right, we'll take Amanda. Great call. Thank you very much. We'll take more.
Taller men than you have opposed me, but they always came up short. Cannons! Blast these scurvy dogs to bits! All hands on deck! Men, acquaint these scallywags with our heavy guns. Gizzards! I love the sound. After I've had my pick, you can fight for the scraps.
Ian Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Steve Hartshorn from the Police Federation of England and Wales is with us. Michelle is in Coventry. Michelle, hi. What's your question, please?
Hello. Thank you for taking my question. The new Home Secretary has come in and wrote to the police chiefs asking them to address woke policing. Now, given that big strides are being made in the police service to make respect and inclusivity and representation of all different diverse areas of the country and communities, what can be done about this, please?
Thank you for the question. Funnily enough, I thought that may well come up today. So I love the English language and like to know where words come from. So a bit of research that I did, and woke seemed to have originated in the 1940s about being alert to sort of racial injustice and being alive to it, which to me, that's what police officers are all about, alert to injustice and trying to put things right. So I think the word, if I'm honest, has been hijacked. It should be a good thing that we are alert to injustice for everybody to make sure it doesn't happen. From what I read, perhaps on Wikipedia, it's been hijacked by the far right to inflict pain on the far left as being overly politically correct, which was a term used many years ago about, you know, if you want to do something properly, you're too politically correct. I think we need to look at what people are going through to understand that everybody has their own cause for concern, and we are there to try and address that to give people the support they so rightly need.
I think what Michelle is probably referring to, and maybe many others will agree with this, that do we need to see police officers doing the Macarena at a carnival? Do we need to spend £10,000 of valuable taxpayers' money on painting police cars with the gay rainbow flag on the side of it? It's that sort of thing that I suspect is referred to as sort of woke policing.
Okay, possibly not in some of those cases. However, as a police officer, part of my job is to build bridges and build relationships with the community that I'm policing. If I'm perhaps spending 5, 10, 15 minutes at a massive event trying to gain their trust, because ultimately in 15 minutes time they are going to be asked to leave the bridge, the road, if I can build that confidence I'm treating them properly and engage with them, that might save me having to use powers policy. It doesn't look particularly good. People say, well, they should be doing real police work. Well, what is real police work? We're there to engage with the public. Go back to the Pelian principles. The police are the public are the police. We can't always rule by law and authority. We have to engage. Again, they don't look particularly good. However, for some of those people, they've had that engagement. It might be the only positive interaction they've had with the police for years. So I think it's incumbent we look at the circumstances more deeply before we perhaps jump to criticism. Some of it's probably well-founded. You think that is an awful lot of money which we could spend somewhere else. However, for that particular community, that might be the right thing to do to win over trust and get some confidence back.
Come back to that word trust, don't we?
We do.
I mean, in the end, it is all about trust. Policing is always, or it should be, by consent of the people. And do you feel at the moment that there is too much resistance to standard normal policing, partly because of some of the more high-profile cases where the police force has, for whatever reason, brought itself into disrepute?
I think at times as a police officer we perhaps forget that we do have the vast majority of public on our side that allow us to police by consent. You look at the recent events with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, and to get that kind of buy-in for the public to stand there in silence, to be good, to be largely well behaved, that's consent in its power. That is amazing to do, amazing to see. We look at some of the other bigger events that have taken place, G20, COP26. Again, the public are phenomenal at supporting the police. Obviously things have happened in policing that have rocked that confidence, and I think from memory, looking at some of the figures, the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, have probably got 250 to 300 police officers under investigation out of a total of 142,500, I believe it is. It's a really small minority. But again, we look at what law and order is. Everybody likes the theory of law and order until it's imparted on them, and then it becomes a different story. You stop someone for speeding, it's, oh, go and catch burglars, go and do your job properly. Well, we are trying to do, because crime happens in vehicles as well. So we don't always have the right answers, but we try to do the best we can, and we do want to get back to everybody understanding that the police force, I believe, can be trusted.
George, I suspect with his tongue slightly in his cheek, says, I'd rather see police officers doing the Macarena than sending vile messages on WhatsApp. Michelle, thank you very much. Let's go to Charlie, who's a new caller in Sutton. Hello, Charlie.
Hello there, happy evening.
Hi.
Basically, it was just going on what your listener before called up about the knife crime for our children. It is becoming disgustingly horrific. My son is in year 7. 2 of his friends have been held up by knives for their phones, for their money. What is there that my son can carry, that is legally okay to protect himself? I make sure my son does not take a knife out of my house. I actually pat him down. I also spot check him on the way home from school when available, that he will not hurt anyone else or himself. However, he does suffer with autism slightly. He doesn't understand tone nor facial expression. He doesn't get sarcasm. So if someone is to hold him up and be sarcastic, he will not understand that. And I'm not having my son bleed out in the street. What can he take to defend himself appropriately and not illegally?
First off, you sound like a great officer. I think it's for your son to make sure he's not carrying anything, ideally of high value, but also any weapons. Is a fantastic step to take, and I wish every other parent took that care. Obviously, with the neurodiversity of your son having autism makes it incredibly difficult because they will interact differently to someone who doesn't have autism to being held up in the street. Sadly, there isn't anything that you can carry legally to try and deter that. Again, for me, it comes back to having more visible policing on the streets, more community involvement to start looking for some of these things taking place. And if they see something they don't think is right, call us, let us know. I'd rather turn up to 20, 30 calls a day for a misunderstanding of what someone's doing and deal with it appropriately than not be called at all. Because I've had friends before who've shown me their own sort of local CCTV and said, this happened at 3 o'clock this morning. I said, have you told your local police? No, there's no point, we won't turn up. I said, you must do, because if we don't know that crime's happening and taking place, we can't respond to it. That's what we need to be told all the time, and I think that will then help inform, because we've got this level of policing of 142,000 odd police officers. Well, who sets the requirement for that? In the last 10 years, we've had 4 million increase in population. The policing officer numbers haven't gone up to carry that. So for me, it comes back to being very operational, and what is the operational requirement for police? How many do we need, and what do the public want? I know what I want. I want to see coppers out on the street to deal with that crime. I also want more detectives to be able to deal with it, and we catch these people and process them and deal with it appropriately through the courts.
It's a really interesting point that Charlie makes there about us on sort of with these different conditions, because a police officer, or indeed anyone else, will not know that. And the way that the police speak to the general public, whether it's a 12-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 65-year-old, I think is so important. And you often hear, it's just anecdotal evidence, but I've experienced it myself, where somebody's incredibly sarcastic. And you think, well, is there any really need for that? And then the next police officer you come across will be the most polite person you've ever met in your life, and you know which one you respect more.
You're right, and for me, it's I speak to people like I'd like to be spoken to myself, until they do something where I have to sort of up the level of engagement to make sure they understand what I'm saying, because it should be a conversation. Even when I've dealt with things as a farms officer, I can just have a normal conversation as we're doing now and talk to somebody, knowing that at some point I may have to take a decisive action to potentially take their life. You don't always have to go in at a really high level, especially with someone that has a neurodiverse condition. It's important that, again, there's more training, because as people become aware of it, in this country I believe it's 1 in 5 males has ADHD. I don't have the figures for autism or other types of neurodiversity, but we need to learn more how we can engage with them to protect them better.
Charlie, thank you very much for that. Let's finish off with Ted in Hildenborough. Hello, Ted.
Oh, hello. I've written out a little statement that I'd like Steve to hear, which I hope is from all the honest and law-abiding people in the country. Thank you very much, Steve, to you and to all your officers for helping to keep us all safe. The small, tiny majority of bad officers get all the publicity, whereas the vast majority of the good officers seldom get all the thanks that they need. So a very big thank you to you, Steve, and all your officers on behalf of me and all the people that I know. Thank you very much.
And we have actually had, Ted, thank you very much. We have had quite a few texts and tweets along that. I'll read this one out from Janine, who says, not sure this will make it through the LBC Ian Dale filter, but my 5-year-old loves the police. They smile, joke, laugh and dance with him much better than seeing horrific WhatsApps. I will take the Macarena any day, so let's celebrate the warmth, fun and good and stop bashing them. I mean, and a lot of people have said how great it is that you've come into the studio to face questions, and there's one person in particular who's impressed by your tie.
Well, thank you very much. For me, it's a pleasure. I would like to do this more often, because that public engagement is crucial. That if they can ask somebody that's been an operational police officer but engaged at a different level to try and help understand what we do, that's part of my job. And I think if you get time to speak to your local officers when they're not busy running around dealing with calls, they would love to engage and speak to you about it, because policing is amazing. We do some really good things, but we only tend to get noticed when it's not gone to plan.
Well, we'll have you back early in the new year. How about that?
I look forward to it. I really do. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. That's Steve Hartswell, National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. It is 9 o'clock on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation, this is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government's being urged to call an emergency meeting to address the possibility households could experience planned blackouts this winter. It's after the national grid warned of 3-hour power cuts if gas supplies run extremely low, although it's saying that's an unlikely scenario. Jo Spears is a full-time carer for her autistic son and is worried.
There are so many families in a position where they have life-saving machines at home running all the time.
No.
And you were
we
very...
had actually at your bookshop way back.
You're right, you're absolutely right. And Nesreen Malik from The Guardian was on the same panel, and she hadn't done it before, so we were sort of saying, oh my God, how are we going to do this? But you were so brilliant. You made us feel completely at home. You came and talked to us before the show, and we were very relaxed, and it was a really good panel. And we all let each other talk, and the audience wasn't that sort of baying audience that it sometimes can be.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed the experience.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, but the secret of Question Time, I thought, was the audience. I mean, saving your grace. Because it was the one chance when we were back in the sort of Victorian hustings where you had a chance to talk to senior politicians. I mean, you weren't a politician, you were there as a commentator, but when you had Cabinet Minister there, I always said to the audience, you know, this is your programme. It's not my programme, it's not the panel's programme. It's for you to quiz the people on the panel, and you must feel free to do it any way you want. I mean, I agree, an hour is, of course, brief for that, and we would take 3 or 4 topics or something. Sometimes we'd just take one when there was a big issue around the Iraq War and 9/11 and those kind of things. But very often the brevity was an issue.
Do you think sometimes it would have been better if they'd stopped with 4 panellists? Because it's now 5, and the second time I was on, when after you had left, there were 6 panellists.
6 is too many.
And I calculated afterwards.
The amount of time you had.
I was a bit annoyed about that programme, but I got 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Now you could say, well, that's your fault. You should have intervened more.
I think 3 minutes of Ian Dale. Probably a lot of people think, oh, that's plenty. Thank you very much.
Anyway, that's all we've got time for.
I tell you what, the reason we went from 4 to 5 was because BBC has an obligation on Question Time to put on the main parties each week and the nationalist parties and the smaller parties, and that took up the 4, and took up 3. Sorry, 3, and that meant there was 1 fourth person who wasn't a politician. And we felt they were always sort of tail end Charlie. They got left out. We thought if we had 2 non-politicians, it wouldn't be possible for the politicians to sideline the person who'd come from outside. Because they, you know, if it was just a journalist or a comedian or a playwright or a poet or whatever it was, they felt a bit outside the panel of 4. But with 5 people, there were 2 of them there, and they could make the running themselves as well. That was the idea, and it worked, actually. It did work. It became less narrowly Westminster politics.
What input did you have on the panels in terms of choosing who should come on?
Very little myself. It was done by... I had a series of really brilliant editors who were much savvier about politics than I am, and who talked all the time to the political parties and sort of decided who they'd have, and had their battles with Number 10. I mean, sometimes wonderful battles. We had one. Ken Clarke, for some reason, was out of favour with Number 10. I think he was Home Secretary or something. And they rang us up and said on the day, and said, I'm sorry, he's got flu, he can't come. And we had a standard answer to that, which was, okay. And they would say, well, and we'll send you so-and-so. And we'd always say, no, Number 10 never sends us somebody for Question Time. We'll ask John Redwood. That was our standard answer.
That would have done it.
That would have done it. And on this occasion, we didn't ask John Redwood. We did ask a backbencher that Number 10 didn't want. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ken Clarke rings up and says, I'm on my way. What time do you want me? We said, but you've got flu. And he said, well, nobody told me. And Number 10 literally was trying to get him off the panel for some reason.
But
he came and did it.
It is
which was great.
interesting now when you look at the Conservative politicians that appear on Question Time. They're generally not cabinet. Well, some of them are cabinet ministers, but more often than not, they aren't. And it seems as though they've just decided that they're not going to put cabinet ministers up
Yes, I think
anymore.
that's right.
Which, I mean,
It's
from
sad.
a democracy point of view, that is appalling, isn't it?
I quite agree. I think that it's the malevolent influence of the image makers of politics who say there's nothing in it for you, Minister.
You got into trouble for saying that once, didn't you?
What's that?
Back in I'm trying to remember, there's a story you tell in the book about the influence of the number 10 press secretary.
Oh, the press secretaries, yes. I remember the line, expensively hired press secretaries whose job is to disguise the truth or something.
Yeah.
I said it in the full knowledge that my grandfather was the first press secretary ever. And
Which
there
I didn't know. I thought it was fascinating.
For David Lloyd George.
Yeah.
And he was, at the Times, said, this is a dangerous route, this press secretary route, because we want to hear from the Prime Minister. Yeah, I did get in trouble for that. But, we know what press secretaries are like. I mean, we've got experience of them now. I'm not saying let's get rid of the calumny. I'm not saying they lie. Just in case the lawyers are out there listening.
I'm sure they're not.
No, I'm sure they're not. But I mean, it's not that the that was when Nixon came to see Wilson. It was years and years ago, and they were going into secret talks, and I was just being a bit tongue in the cheek.
And you were doing this sort of commentary on Nixon. What was it? Arriving at the airport, leaving at the airport, or something like that.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously, doing a commentary like that, or on a state occasion, royal funeral, royal wedding, whatever. That is a very different type of broadcasting to presenting Panorama or sort of presenting an election night.
Yes.
When did you first realise that you were actually rather good at doing these sort of state occasions?
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, when I began doing them, I did do commentary on political events, and then I felt freer to be a bit cheeky. And to mock them a bit.
Which does come through in the book, I have to tell you.
Nixon arriving with the Union Jack upside down on his car, which is a sign of distress in the Navy, if you hang the Union flag upside down. Anyway, so and then I began doing Trooping the Colour and the state opening of Parliament. And I then began to get the hang of what I'd call commentary that holds back from the event. So you let the pictures tell the story. And I love doing those. And I mean, I still do the Cenotaph each year, which is a very moving public event. And it's not your job to comment on it or do anything other than sit beside the person on the sofa watching the television and occasionally saying, this is what's happening now, this is what's happening now. It's an interesting, I wouldn't call it an art, it's an interesting skill that you learn and hone, and I love doing it. It's a lot of work to get the words right. It's very difficult, not to emote too much or to over-egg things, just to keep quite quiet.
And also not to repeat too much, because the only time I've had to do this was when the Queen's coffin was coming back from Northolt to Buckingham Palace, and I had the TV screens in front of me here, and I could see where they were. And our reporter was at Buckingham Palace, and I then had to commentate probably for about 5 minutes on the progress of this. And I was thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. But it was quite exhilarating in a way, because in the end I found that I could do it, and I wasn't repeating myself every sort of 30 seconds and sort of saying something inane. But
was this on television?
No, this was sitting
on
here
radio.
in this studio.
Yes.
Because on radio, you really have got to describe the
that
pictures.
I find I've never actually done a live radio commentary. I was tried out when I was very young on the Lord Mayor's show, and I was so bad they never asked me back. So I like the pictures because you can shut up.
Well,
and